Are you looking to get ready, be prepared, and transform your financial future? Then you've come to the right place. This is the Get Ready Money podcast with Tony Stewart, where Tony has insightful conversations with financial experts who are changing the way we think about money. Catch up on the latest financial trends and hear practical advice from Tony and his expert guests so you can build healthy habits that work. Be empowered with tips for implementing small changes that can have a big impact on your financial future. So sit back and get ready to hear from today's guest.
Welcome to the Get Ready Money podcast, changing the way we think about money. I'm pleased to be joined today by Diana Kahn. Diana is an attorney, speaker, and coach. In this episode, we'll be discussing Diana's insights on how we change the way we think about money and generational wealth. Diana, welcome to the Get Ready Money podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, glad you could join us. So, let's get started. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story?
So I originally grew up in Bulgaria. My parents moved here probably when I was 9. Same story you probably hear from a lot of immigrants. My parents came here, wanted me to have the American dream, and gave up lots to be here. So that's kind of how I came over originally. Went to DC, then Montgomery County, and now I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and have kind of been stuck here since. So if you ask my husband, he'll probably tell you that I tied him to a tree here and I'm not letting him leave. But that's he's not on the podcast, so that doesn't matter.
Okay, well, we can ask him for a comment offline. But
He's a New Yorker through and through, so.
Oh, that's awesome. So, one of the things that you're doing is you talk about redefining the legal experience. How are you doing that? How are you redefining the legal experience?
So I am trying to change the way the game is played with realtors and also with just horizontal integration of marketing and then law firms as well. If you think about most lawyers that you work with, there's kind of the jive we get is they don't call you back right away. They charge you billables hours in 10-minute increments. I just sometimes have a general question. So we are trying to create more a family dynamic law firm where we are there as though like we're your friends first and a law firm second. So you can sort of call, talk to any one of us. We market differently, we make it available. We don't necessarily jump to billables. And then we have an integrated system of companies that work together, which allow us to provide services that if maybe you don't need a lawyer right now, you call us about estate planning, but then you say, oh, my mom is downsizing. This is something we're considering. Well, we have realtors who can help, or we have a title company that can help with a deed recording. And it just kind of works really well together.
Well, that's awesome. And, I think that is something with lawyers is that people kind of shy away for that reason. I did have a question on marketing because I know historically, at least in California, there have been some limits on marketing and some of the things that you're doing, like with the integration. Is that changed? Is that a shift?
So I think it's just about disclosures, right? Like when I do commercials, which we do like a lot of stuff. We usually just advertise the law firm. So we just picked one company that's known for the brand and the image. Because having a commercial makes it seem like, if somebody see that they might misinterpret what the services we offer. So when you watch our commercial or you look at my website, it's mostly focused on my law firm and then I'll say things like I also hold a broker's license and I can help you sell your home. But I try to like kind of toe the line of understanding what is actually legal representation versus what is actually, broker representation. And you just have to be very careful and make sure disclose, disclose, disclose. That's the ticket.
Yeah, well, I think that goes across, the whole, I guess, professional advisor spectrum is that it's important to always disclose what you're doing. And I think for consumers is to, pay attention and look for those disclosures. Do you have any tips for consumers, to think about, when they're hearing these disclosures, instead, I think a lot of consumers just hear the disclosure and they just tune out.
So I think it's tricky because you just get overwhelmed with the amount of information people are provided. I find it's very overwhelming. And as a lawyer, I spend a lot of time just researching things for a living. And one of the things that I found that is the best source of advice, at least in my state, is the state actually has a website. If you're getting a contractor to work on your house, and here it's like the Home Improvement Commission. And you would think that that's not a good place to go, but instead of trying to focus on what's done and what's not, the state you're in usually has like a quick checklist of things to verify to make sure you're working with good people in the industry and that you can even do a license check. As somebody who does a lot of like claims against false work or false disclosures, you would not believe the amount of people who say they're licensed properly to do X and they don't even hold that license. And that's just a general search.
Yeah, well, I used to do insurance litigation, and that would always be the first thing, we would turn to is, the Department of Insurance website, if they were securities licensed, the FINRA website, but also just a simple Google search,
Yep.
search, like John Doe complaints. And
Yep. And the other thing I think that people don't realize is if you are Googling anybody who's working with you and you see just positivity online, that's not always a good sign either. Like, I know that my reviews are pretty good, but if you Google me, I do have a couple bad ones, right? And that I think that that shows humanity and humanness. So sometimes when I Google a company and all I find is just great feedback, but then you kind of keep doing a little bit of a deeper dive and their website's only been around for like a year, then all of a sudden you're like, are you actually that great? Or have you just kind of set up this front? So I would definitely, don't be thrown off if you Google somebody and they have like one or two negative reviews or that that actually just shows that they have a client base big enough that somebody was angry enough. Now, obviously, don't take it into consideration fully that it's true, read it, but that's a great resource to you as well.
yeah, definitely. No, I agree. And I think your tip there about, more recent website or, not really a history of things is not necessarily always a bad sign because everybody has to start. And
Right.
so we've all started and we've all only been in business for a month, but it is something to keep in mind if it's somebody who seems experienced and is claiming experience, but then it doesn't add up, that's
Right.
definitely an important point. So,
I mean, you'd be shocked at how many people. And not that I'm complaining. I'll take the compliments, I'll take the referrals, but you'd be shocked how many people refer me with just a simple, "Hey, Tony, talk to Diana. She's great at real estate law." And then that person gets on the phone with me, does like one phone conversation, and then they're like, "All right, I'm ready to retain you for $5,000." And I'm like, "Have you talked to any other lawyer? Like, have you vetted these people?" So I think that's a lot to be said about word of mouth and then also doing your own research. Take into account the recommendations you get, but also make sure you vet at least two or three people before you hire them. And
I
that's even for
love
me.
that. Now, I love that. Sorry, I just wanted to emphasize that point. It's important to vet your advisors and do your own research. That is absolutely wonderful advice. So, for people watching and listening, I hope you listen to the rest of the episode, but this is definitely a key takeaway for this episode. So, appreciate it.
Well, in the state of Maryland, that's where I'm from. There's this, I'm a younger lawyer. I'm nearing my 40s, but I'm still considered a young, newer lawyer in the industry. And I very often tell people, do you know that in Maryland, lawyers are not legally required to take a single continuing education course once they pass the bar? And what that means is in most industries, real estate, title, you have to continue your education if you're going to hold a license. So in the state of Maryland, if you're a lawyer, you don't have to take a single class at all once you pass the bar. So when you see a lawyer with just gray hair and you're like, they have a lot of experience, they have good website. Well, maybe that's great, but knowing what I know about Maryland, sometimes I'm like, well, maybe you need to vet with the right questions. And what does that look like? When I tell people vet your lawyer in the state of Maryland, it's not just can they write a contract, it's how many do you write? Is this part of your business? Are you like an all-encompassing attorney, or are you strictly focused on what I need and how many success rates do you have for my specific issue? Because I think that's another thing is sometimes we try to be a jack of all trades, and that's not necessarily always a good thing.
Yeah, no, and I think that runs across all areas, is does the person actually have significant experience in doing what they're doing is, is this something they do once a year? Or is this something they do more often? It's like going to an estate planning attorney and asking them to, I don't know, do a real estate transaction.
Right.
They have the license to do it, but they may not be that experienced in doing it.
Yeah, and like I think that's a big thing. And I've been burned before trying to take on something that I thought I could do, but then I kind of felt out of my depth. It's not a good feeling for me. It's not a good feeling for my clients. So I always kind of tell people vet because not everybody is purposely trying to hurt you, but if they are not a good fit for you, then that's problematic.
Yeah, and I think quite often, the advisor, attorney, accountant is trying to help by saying, "Hey, I can help you with that," but it's you also have to take into account, if they're able to really do that, or are they just trying to help you? So, let's
Right.
switch gears a little bit. One of the things you talk a lot about is generational wealth. Would you mind defining what is generational wealth?
So generational wealth to me is just the ability to build up your wealth in a way that allows generations after you to feel that effect. And that is not, for me, wealth is not necessarily just money. And yes, wealth is a big portion goes with money, right? Like it does. But if you think about it, um, I came here from another country. I had pretty much nothing. My parents had to start investing in the US. They had the US dollar. There was pretty much nothing. Now I have kids, and even though I have not passed away yet, I'm building your generational wealth. I'm not just, making money at my job. I'm investing in real estate. I'm investing in things that long term, if I hold them, are going to double in value, triple in value. And that will allow my children to have other opportunities. So if I pass away, they're going to have residual income that sort of stays with you. So generational wealth is really about the fact of just financially being able to support into the future, but also putting in parameters that will allow the generations after you, specifically your kids or other people, to kind of grow because of what you've set up in your life. And the United States in general, statistics say that we are one of the only nations that don't really pass away and leave generational wealth for kids. And I think that's speaking a little bit about my own personal beliefs. I think the health system in the United States is broken. So as we age, it's harder to afford general care. And I think that plays a big part in sort of squandering away your wealth prior to passing. And you could prevent that with proper planning.
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge thing. And healthcare costs are a huge component of retirement costs. Yeah. And we could definitely spend the whole podcast talking about issues in the American healthcare system. But that's definitely a topic for another conversation. So, why is wealth preservation important for everyone? Why is it just not for rich people?
So I think wealth preservation is important because you don't realize the amount of things that you don't realize, right? So I would just, in the very basic sense, is if you have, I'll talk about my own personal life. I have a child, he just turned 7, and he's got a slew of diagnoses that when you Google it, he could be the next Steve Jobs. He could be, the next Bezos with the diagnosis that he's got. But he's also could be living in my basement in his 40s. And there's just that trajectory of how he ends up, right? That's a trajectory that I can't predict. I can help him cope, I can give him better education, but really his future is still ahead of him. So growing that preservation of wealth is allowing to not just plan if he does become Steve Jobs, but also plan for me to sort of say, what can I do today to allow for, as he ages, to have the financial support or the means if I'm not around and he does end up needing to live in my basement or does need extra assistance? How can we grow our wealth or grow what we have created in a way that preserves it so we're not basically playing best case scenario or anticipating we'll get the assistance we need from, Social Security income or Medicaid or any of those like financial based systems that do allow help. I just don't think are not enough in certain cases.
That's great. I love that because with our kids is we don't know. Is we have a 20-year-old and it's like okay, we're hoping, he'll
Right.
be able to live successfully on his own. But, the fact is that a lot of people in their 20s are still living with their parents. It's
Yep.
just, it's the way it is right now. So it's hard. But yeah, having a little bit of money set aside to help them, for different scenarios. But as you point out, it's like, you don't want to die with zero. I think there's even a book called Die with Zero. Uh,
Right.
you know,
And the other thing that I think people don't consider is that we're not all going to live to our 60s or 70s. And I know that's, controversial at best, but when you think about that, right, it's like, well, I have three young kids. If something unexpected happens to me, if I had no plans, the guardian of my children would get their inheritance until they turn 18 because my children would not be old enough to sort of have monetary value, own homes, all of those things. Well, the problem is if you're not setting up a generational track or some sort of instruction blueprint for your family, unintentionally or not, whoever is the guardian of your children could squander the wealth you left. Maybe they're going through financial times or difficulties before your children can even kind of turn that age. And working to preserve generational wealth is also putting in a blueprint of worst case scenarios and how do we preserve that?
yeah, I love that. Having that plan in place. I was just reflecting back, when I was in college, a friend of mine passed away over a spring break.
Yep.
Just a fluke accident. He came from a farming family and there was a farming accident. And, so these things can happen at any age. So, for the younger people watching and listening, today is the best day to create a plan, especially if you have a family. Um, don't
It's
wait.
huge. It's huge. I mean, you just don't consider it, right? And it just, you never know what's going to happen. I personally, for me, my mom got really sick a few years ago, and my mom doesn't have a lot of finances. And she also just didn't have, anything prepped for us. Now, end of the story, thankfully, she's still alive today and everything's good. But we went from her going on vacation to her being in the ICU for 6 months on life support overnight. And I talk about that a lot because I was postpartum. I had a 3-week-old baby. I had two other kids. And I woke up one day and all of a sudden I was like, well, now I have to figure out how to pay my mom's bills and I have to figure out where her credit cards are and I have to figure out how to care for my dad. And those are all things that I think people don't realize are things we should think about, but also it's hard to plan for because they're hard conversations. But the person who's grieving you, it's really not just about you or just the wealth. It's just about making sure that those around you who love you have the support they need.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it is the support and it's the communication. Um, you know, to know what to do, how to do it, and everything
Yeah.
else. I
So
love it.
it's huge.
Yeah. So one of the things is, you mentioned you run multiple businesses. Yeah. How do you find balance to accomplish so much?
I don't think that I have a balance per se. I think I've just learned to sit with my own expectations and not others. And what I mean by that is, I have a total of seven businesses right now. I have three young kids. I'm married. I have elderly parents, and there's a lot in there. And when I first gave birth, I was like, my kids are going to eat organic and they're going to, I was going to be that crunchy mom, for lack of a better word. And then every time I gave them, fish sticks or chicken nuggets, I would feel like a horrible person. So now I just sort of look at it as every day I have glass balls flying in the air and I have plastic balls. And if I can't keep all of them up, be in tune with that. And the first moment you realize that you can't keep all the balls up, triage which ones are plastic, let them drop on the floor. They're not going to break tomorrow. So now if my kids are eating chicken nuggets, I'm like, you know what? They're eating. It's fine. Like they're eating. I had everything happened today. I helped 10 people with legal cases. I did all of these things. I'm not going to beat myself up. And it's a freeing mindset because then it also spills into business where I personally think it's okay to tell somebody, hey, listen, I had something personal going on and I couldn't call you back. I'm sorry. Our expectation is we call you back within 2 days. You didn't get that here. I had to triage and I'm sorry. And if a client on the other side says that's not okay, then be okay with that answer, right? But like be okay with the decisions you're making when you can't do it all every day.
I love that. Be okay with the decisions if you can't do it every day. I think that's so important. So, there's a lot of people, especially I think working mothers who feel that way. I mean, how do
Yeah.
you really give yourself that grace to say and the compassion to say this is okay?
It was actually my now 7-year-old who taught me to have that passion and compassion towards stuff. And it sounds like such a crazy story, but we tell our kids all the time. I'm sure what you told your kids and what I tell my kids are very different, but one of the couple of things that I tell my kids and have told them every day since they were born is you're human. Humans make mistakes. Adults make mistakes. Those are things I say to them all the time. I say things like the day's not over yet. We can make things better. And these were just sayings that I was saying to my kids to help them. And when my mom got really sick, I had a very bad day where I decided to shove all my kids into a car and take them to the zoo because I was being a bad mom and I should spend more time with them. And I was trying to fill all these narratives in, right? So we go to the zoo. My mom's sick. My husband's looking at me like I'm insane. Made into the zoo. I yelled at my kids like 5 seconds later. Shoved them all back in the car and I started crying. I was hysterically crying. And my kid in the back seat, one of them was like, Mommy, what's wrong? And I said, you know what, buddy? I, I just, I wanted to be a good mom. And I've just really been struggling. And I'm really sorry I yelled at you. And I'm feeling really bad about it. And my kid just said, Mommy, that's okay. Adults make mistakes. And the day is not over yet. And we could turn it around. And these are things that I've said to him. So he was regurgitating something that we say to children all the time to make being human acceptable. But when he said it to me, it was like, wow, like like I would have never given myself that grace. And I think from the time we're children to the time we grow up, we somehow let go of this grace and set up all these expectations. And I think learning from what you tell others, you need to internalize that for yourself as well.
I love that. And, we do learn a lot from our kids, but, just going back to the fish sticks is, we were the same way. We're not going to give our kid fast food. And then, of course, our son discovered McDonald's. And so,
There you go.
it's like, you got to give them McDonald's every once in a while. So,
My husband and I say that all the time. We're like, when we were pregnant with our first, we're like, we're never going to give our kids McDonald's. And now, as we have three and we have one with feeding challenges and like lots of things, now we talk about, well, now I understand why these families are at McDonald's. Like it's quick, it's convenient, kids like the simplicity, and you can lean into it and sort of realize that like not everything is perfect. And hey, they had vegetables today, or you could set the expectation that you see on social media or you see out in the world, and it's just not real. I don't think it's real, and I think it takes a lot of stress.
yeah, I mean, this is not an endorsement of McDonald's by any means, but it's like McDonald's. They like their Happy Meals. They like getting that toy and getting a chocolate milk and having chicken nuggets. And as you point
Yeah,
out, as long as you're not doing that every meal, it's like with anything. It's even getting back to the balance,
right,
helping your kids balance that.
right. And hey, speaking as an expert, McDonald's now gives apples on the side. So I'm just saying, get the apples, and then there you go, some fruit.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's it. Again, it's finding the balance. I think if I recall right, it's been a while, because our son is older, but, you could split between the apple slices and the French fries. You just got a very small serving
There you go.
of French
Yep.
fries, and then the kid's balanced.
And there you
And they
go.
can't argue with you about it because you're still getting the fries. So,
Yeah. And then that's, the conversation here really could be about McDonald's, but it could just be about expectations in life. And I think money and generational wealth in these conversations, people say they're not related. And I really think that they are. They really, really are. Because you can't grow generational wealth and also, not be realistic with the goals and values that your family has. And it just, they go hand in hand, and they really, really do. You can only manage money as well as if you're in tune with what your family values are.
I love that is, and it does bring it back to the money conversation because that's what we're here about, not talking about McDonald's or parenting tips. But it is all interrelated. One thing spills into the other. So, Diana, let's switch gears. We're going to jump into what I call the get ready questions. These are questions that I ask all my guests. They're more rapid fire questions. The
Sure.
first one is, what basic money concept do you wish people knew?
Oh gosh, basic money concept would be, I do a lot of stuff with trusts, and I would just encourage people to know more about trusts and how they work when it comes to money.
Yeah, I think that's important because, again, to get back to what we were talking about earlier, trust and estate planning is for everyone. You don't have to be wealthy
Yep.
to create a trust.
I'm trying to change the mindset. Trusts are not for rich people, they're for smart people.
Ooh, I like that. Trusts are not for rich people, they're for smart people. I'm writing that down. So, for everybody watching or listening, that's a great tip.
You
Um,
guys need Tony's notes. I've been having him write down stuff the entire podcast.
Yeah, so I do that so people watching and listening sometimes do get that for me with a pause while I'm writing something down. So, Diana, the next question is, what is one simple thing people can do each year to set themselves up for financial success?
Save a little bit of your paycheck every single paycheck. If you're not on paychecks and you're a business owner, then make sure you have two bank accounts outside of the money you make yourself, one for taxes, one for savings.
I love that. And, save, save, save. But, you can also spend a little bit of money, but save first and then
Well,
spend.
also, like I don't have that much money saved in my bank account, despite the fact that I said that, because for me, saving is investing in real estate. So I have 100 real estate properties. For me, that's my saving, right? Like the equity grows on them, it just stays. So there's different definitions of save as well.
I love that. And that's the thing is to find what's right for you and to make a plan and to stick with it. Um,
Right.
so, what is one habit that people can change when it comes to their money?
Not checking their credit card statements or bank account statements more than, once a month. I check mine almost daily. You don't have to check it daily. I'm type A, but obviously I run a lot of businesses. My staff have credit cards, all they have credit cards, and don't just check it to make sure the charges are accurate. Make sure you know you're in tune with what you're spending. I think a big portion of how easy it is to spend money now, we lose track of some of the things we spend. It's not even a swipe of a credit card anymore where, you feel that. Sometimes now you just put your phone on it, and that doesn't feel like real spending. And we don't have that affiliation. Make sure you're in tune with what you're spending.
Yeah, I love that. I think switching to all digital, while it's convenient, it loses that tactical aspect of having to count out bills and,
Yeah,
looking in your wallet and going, oh boy, this is all the money I have in my wallet, and that makes a difference.
it's huge.
Yeah, so that's some advice. So, what money myth are you trying to break?
Oh gosh, if I had to break just one money myth, it would be that if you save, 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 you're going to retire and be rich. Saving does not equal wealth. Investments do, budgeting does, knowing, being in tune with what you're spending does. I don't think just saving does, and it doesn't create happiness either. Because I think sometimes, at least some people that I speak to that are very money conscious, they're just putting money away. And it's like, well, are you going on vacations? No, I'm saving. That's not the purpose of it, right? Like you can save and budget and do all of these things together. Don't do one to the extreme.
Yeah, I love that. And there is the whole FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, where people give up pretty much everything to
Yep.
reach a financial independence number. Most of the people in the fire community have found that they're not happy, even when they reach their fire numbers.
Yep. I just,
So,
it's difficult. It's difficult. I think budgeting is a huge factor that people don't realize works really well.
yeah, it's budgeting is not a dirty word. It's just monitoring your money and seeing where it goes and keeping your expenses lower than your income.
I
So,
make my 3-year-old budget. I know it's crazy, but it's not about money. I make my 3-year-old like they get tokens when they do things. Then there's tokens like I take some back for like basic living, and then and they could do it for like fun events. And she's 3 and she gets it.
that is a great idea. I love that because, there are so many people doing financial literacy for kids in so many ways, but that is a very simple way that kids do understand.
Yep.
So,
Now, what we do is, I take some as taxes, right? From like whatever they work, I take a portion back as taxes. What I typically do with my kids, and they're young, and we'll see how I adjust to it. But right now, that money, whatever it is, or whatever monetary value we have, is then used for a family trip once a year. And we look at how much each person contributed, and then we usually do like if it's like, 20%, 10%, whatever it is, each family member gets to do a quick presentation on where the family is going to go, and they have how much we have to spend, like, what the time, and they have to do either like a budgeting of the trip, but also like sell the trip based on ideas and what would be fun to do. And then the kids who, whatever percentage of your budget that you added in for the year, like if you had 20, you get, 2 times the amount of talk time than the sibling who maybe did like 10%. So it's just, again, it's manipulation of math a little differently as they're young, but they get it and they get into it.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that people often overlook is that kids tend to get these concepts that we need to give them a little more credit. So let's
Yep.
get out the time machine for a minute. What advice would you give your younger self if you could go back in time knowing what you know now about money?
Buy a house as quickly as you can. I'm in real estate, so that's my thing, but I help people reach financial independence. I did not purchase my first house till I was in my 30s. Most of my staff are in their young 20s, and I help them buy a house as soon as they move, like they come work for me. And the reason being is because within 10 years, you're going to have more equity in that house than you probably did on a yearly budget working for a firm. And you just don't realize how that grows.
Definitely, definitely. So that's definitely something to consider. So great advice. So what is your go-to favorite money resource for yourself? Whether it's a podcast, book, newsletter, app, or website, what do you turn to?
So for me, I do a lot of podcasts. I do the Everyday Millionaire Show podcast a lot, which talks about just budgeting and kind of what works out. I find that it's easy to do. It's easy to like listen to it while I'm, working out or whatever else I'm doing. So podcasts are your friends. That's why I'm on one.
Cool, cool. Well, thanks for being here. So to close out, what is your number one tip on changing the way we think about money?
Well, I think you said it best, right? Budget is not a bad word. Well, I think just financial education is not a bad word. Like, just put it back into your life. I think some of us are really kind of focused on if we don't have money, we don't want to think about it. It's kind of like an out of sight, out of mind thing. But really, it's not about how much you're bringing in, it's about how much you're spending out. And that comes with, no knowledge, a lot of knowledge of what's going on in your life.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think we can't undervalue financial education. Money is a part of all of our lives, and choosing not to face up to it is not going to make it go away, and it's not going to help us. But
Right?
understanding our money does lead to positive results.
100%.
So that's great advice. So Diana, where can people learn more about you? And find out about all the great work you're doing.
Yep. You can go to our website. It's dklawmd.com. Believe it or not, I'm going to give you my cell phone number. Yes, on a podcast. You could also shoot me a text. It is 443-739-6724. That is my actual cell phone number. It is not AI. I will respond.
Well, that's awesome. Is it okay if I put that in the show notes?
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. So for everybody watching and listening, the link to Diana's website and cell phone will be in show notes so you can get in touch with her. So Diana, thanks for
Amazing.
joining us today on the Get Ready Money podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Yeah, and thank you everyone as always for tuning into this episode of the Get Ready Money podcast. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money, please be sure to subscribe and to tell a friend. Until next time, let's change the way we think about money.